Hey, this is the Dean Abbott podcast. I'm talking tonight with Mark Derian. Mark is an all-around smart guy who does work with people, but I don't quite understand exactly what you do. So why don't we start there? What is it that you do exactly?
I am a therapist. I'm a proudly unlicensed therapist.
Now, can you say that in California? I know you live in
Yeah,
California.
yeah, you can say
Okay.
it, and therapists hate it because they went through this whole training process that I went through about 2/3 of the way.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't my choice that I didn't continue. I actually got kicked out. And then I went to another graduate program and I dropped out because it really just felt like I was supporting something that was unethical and I didn't want any part of it.
Can you tell us more about that? Can you tell us what got you kicked out?
Well, officially, I got kicked out because they didn't think I was going to be a good therapist. It wasn't grades or anything like that. And they have the right to say that. There was a Supreme Court case that I think went back to 2007 or 5 that said, look, if the academic staff in a graduate school program for clinical psychology, if they just say you're not going to be a good therapist, and they don't have to give a reason beyond that, they can. They don't have to give a good reason beyond that because I think there was a young woman who didn't want to counsel homosexuals,
Mm.
or she would have maybe requested some kind of conversion therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I don't know, there's some things with freedom of religion or allowing people to practice their freedom of religion. There's some contentious court case, and the court ruled that yeah, academic staff could just say, yeah, we don't want you to be a therapist. So that's what happened to me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I stuck with the program a little bit longer. I got in some more clinical hours, which was, very beneficial and helpful. But I think there's a steep learning curve there, and I honestly like it. I just can't. It sounds like I'm up my own ass when I say it, but it's totally true. It just is not ethical for me to support the APA. And I'm not saying that anybody who supports the APA isn't ethical. Just from my perspective and what I know, I can't do it.
So when you say the APA, I mean, I would assume that
American Psychological
yeah,
Association,
right,
like
but
the main
primarily
governing body, yeah, in
sure, but
America at least.
primarily you must maybe not take the diagnoses, the DSM, the sort of labels as seriously as your standard therapist might. Is that true?
Well, I mean, it's not that I don't take those seriously. It's all about context. So, I mean, if you give somebody a diagnosis of OCD,
Mhm.
like, what does that mean conceptually? Does that mean that's something they can work through? Does that mean that's something they can't work through? Yeah, I mean, we can do a few sessions together, and I'll tell you that you have some OCD symptoms. And if you want to go through the checklist with me, and if you want me to give, I mean, I can't diagnose you. I wouldn't anyway. I mean, you know what that means, and I wouldn't anyway. But we can go through and diagnose you. But if it's neither here nor there. I mean, that debate, which we definitely had in graduate school, is it ethical to diagnose somebody? Is it not ethical? Well, what's your framework? I mean, how do you view a diagnosis? I mean, what even is human psychology? Is that something we can work through? Is it something that we can't? And I mean, one of the problems with you know, general issue psychology, I'll call it, or conventional psychology, is they don't really have the capacity, the intellectual capacity to have those conversations. Because then we have to start talking about what emotions are and how they work. And because they work in a certain way, how do you deal with them? I mean, this is my whole spiel. And I did end up writing a dissertation, which was never officially accepted, but I did write it um, about that exact thing. Like, these are the conversations we need to be having, not do you give somebody the diagnosis of OCD?
Right. And I think too, my observation has been that a lot of what you're calling standard issue psychology, the mental health industry for sure, has almost no philosophical or religious conception of what human nature is. And
Nope.
so you're kind of constantly reacting piecemeal to symptoms rather
Right.
than sort of moving toward people within, I think what you're saying, a larger framework of what the person is and what the end of a person is. Like, what are people for? That
Right.
question never even comes up,
Oh, well,
right?
they're just not prepared to have that debate. Yeah, you're right. It's piecemeal. It's a hodgepodge. We do things like, we'll base this our therapy on scientific research. That's what cognitive behavioral therapy claims.
Hmm.
While that's true, there's scientific research for every therapy. And I think to say that it's evidence based, yeah, yeah, that's which is a presumptuous term, right? It implies that other forms of therapy aren't evidence based, which is not true. And the only reason that there's a lot of evidence for cognitive behavioral therapy is because there's a huge push um, during the Cold War. Actually, there's a huge increase in funding for science on a federal level. And psychology was seen as unscientific because it was still much influenced by Freud and the psychoanalytic tradition, which isn't scientific. It would be, they would say it's subjective, but well, Freud wouldn't say that, but other the Freudians at the time would, and yeah, so they just try to make psychology sound more scientific, and the only philosophy that it's based on is Stoicism,
Mm,
and nobody who practices cognitive behavioral therapy. I mean, you probably count the number of them who've actually, on one hand, who've actually read Stoicism and know what Epictetus means, and but
right.
but what does that mean, and what were the other schools of thought around Greece and Rome at the time,
Right.
and why did Stoicism take off, and why are you talking about Stoicism now? Oh, because this guy, oh God,
Ryan
the
Holiday.
rational motive behavioral therapy guy.
Oh,
I took a class with his wife.
rational. Was it Glasser?
Not not Glasser.
Ellis, Albert Ellis.
Albert Ellis. Thank you. Yeah, because Albert Ellis was influenced by Stoicism. That's why. But it's yeah, it was a theory of therapy that sounded good, but philosophically it doesn't have a leg to stand on.
Yeah. The so if somebody comes to you for therapy, what do they get that they wouldn't get if they went to a standard issue psychology person?
Well, I mean, there's nothing I'm going to say here probably in this talk that's going to make me sound like I'm doing something that new, because I think a lot of people say what I'm about to say, but I think I actually do it. And that is, you go to most psychologists and they will deal with symptoms. Like
Mhm.
you have a money issue, they will deal with that symptom. You have a negative belief about yourself. That's a symptom, right? You weren't born with that negative belief. You learn that, or you didn't really learn it. It just kind of was imbued on you outside of your awareness. And so it's my job to say, yeah, these problems that you have, they are the symptom, and we got to look at the few psychological steps that you take that gives rise to that symptom. And I've been doing this for 10 years now, and it's pretty clear. It's about 4 or 5 standard steps. Two or three of them are unconscious, and of course they're unconscious, because if it was conscious, then you would simply change it, and you wouldn't
Right,
need therapy in the first place, which is what cognitive behavioral therapists don't understand.
right. Yes,
Um, yeah,
I remember seeing like a little meme about CBT once, where it was a guy talking to a CBT therapist who's saying he's depressed, and the CBT therapist is saying something like, "Well, have you thought about not being?"
right.
Right, like,
Well,
sort of
I
making the
mean,
point.
that sounds stupid, but let's see. I got a pen here. In 2014, I was just thinking about this. I had a professor, and she was talking about hey, if you want to feel better, all you really have to do is hold it. They had people hold a pen or something, or a pencil in their mouth like this, right? I mean, if you're not watching, I just put a
Pen
pen to
is
my
not
mouth
very good
horizontally.
usage, yeah.
So I made the face of somebody who's smiling, right? I'm doing that, and you
Mm,
feel better. And they were talking about that in 2014, and I'm sitting there thinking, no way, this is ridiculous. And of course, 2 years later, with the whole replication crisis that came out, and no, you had this idea, and you were using science, you were using this research money to defend this idea that you already had.
right,
Um, yeah, it's while it is true that life and change that you make comes down to the choices you make. That's true, but on what resolution are you making that choice? If you're making it at the belief level, it's already gone. Like you've already made the choice. You're not going to change the belief. You only change your belief when you change how you interact with yourself, ultimately, how you relate with your emotions. And
Mhm.
because of that, how you communicate with other people.
What are
That's the only thing that's going to change. But we need to find out what you're doing. And yeah, so that's what I help people with, is just to get clarity on the few steps they take that leads to whatever their dysfunction is. And then I help them talk through it based on what their issue is. And I run a group that helps people continue to process emotions. And you'll see, it doesn't happen all at once, but it's like moving chess pieces into place, right? Like you got to put the pieces in the right place in your mind, like the psychological
Mm,
places. And that includes, getting, itemizing fears, going through resentments,
mm,
looking at how you contribute to your issue, your part. It's not your fault,
mm,
but it is your responsibility, which is a very easy distinction to make for pretty much anybody, except when we come close to a psychological complex, when our IQ drops about 50 points. And then we just can't hold on to that distinction.
mm, mhm.
And when we talk about responsibility, you're like, oh, you're saying it's my fault. And, that's okay if that's where you are. I have this whole way of just, helping you through that step by step on a decision by decision level.
Mhm. It's interesting. You encounter this a lot. It's a kind of matter of justice, because there is often a sort of lifelong injustice that arises out of abusive relationships, or especially early abusive relationships. This is just an example of what you're talking about, in
Mhm.
which, especially if you're abused when you're young, it's not your fault that you were abused, but you end up in a situation where the you are the only person who could possibly fix any of the damage that you sustain. And so, because you are the only person who can fix it, the reparation of all that becomes your responsibility. So
Right.
you know, and that is fundamentally unjust, right? To be just, the person who did the damage should be the person who fixes the damage, but that is not the human situation that um and I think that's why people resent having to get well, is that they have to
Oh,
come to
okay. So then
grips.
my dad would get away with it.
Right, what's that?
Then my dad would get away with it. And
Right,
we don't want to let him get away with it. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Well, that's a tough pill to swallow. I would never ask anybody to swallow that pill. I would say, come to therapy and let's put in the work and let's just start talking through things that I know you're able to talk about and we'll get you there.
Mm, right.
Yeah, that's
Conceptually,
tough.
they have to do that at some level. They have to accept that they must fix the damage they've suffered, because no one else can.
It's metaphysically impossible. It's never going to happen. Yeah, it's like an easier example that I always say is, I mean, if you get rear-ended in your car and you get whiplash, like even if the guy comes back and pays for your medical bill, you still need to go in and do the rehab on your neck.
Hmm.
But it's tough with our parents, especially at an age before we were maybe even conscious, and it's just becomes our worldview. And
Hmm.
it's just so hard to get out of it. I mean, you've probably encountered this a lot. Like how people view their parents is how you view the world
Hmm.
generally. I mean, these are generalizations. How you do sex is how you do everything. Again, these are generalizations. And it's like, oh yeah, because of this issue, I have this worldview. And yeah, I'm not gonna let myself get out of this worldview in a sense to hurt my parents, to hurt them again. And yeah, I really want to get people to a place where they're even willing, not that you have to, but they're willing to even apologize to people who have hurt them.
Mm,
Um, because so often, yeah, you were hurt and now you put your own hurt into that relationship because of the hurt.
mm, hmm.
Um, Not to minimize anything that somebody else may have done. I'm sure they did something wrong. But what, do you only apologize when you're 100% wrong and the other person's 100% right? That never happens. It's
Mm,
always like about 50-50,
mm, mhm.
in my, but
Right.
it's different in a parent
Right.
child relationship, right? It's definitely not 50-50. And
But you
that's
want to encourage
painful.
ownership where you can.
Yeah, I want to encourage an ownership. I really want to encourage yeah, just the realization that these problems in your hat that you have in your life, you are really perpetuating. And you want to perpetuate these problems. Like, you talked about injustice. Uh, that's a very powerful emotion that really, and it's, you don't have to be able to get it, like watch those Harry Potter movies. They get you emotionally wrapped in because it's unjust, like the way they treat Harry, and Malfoy lies, and 6-year-olds get it. Or, I mean, I still remember this one time I was in second grade and I got, uh, like people thought I was pushing people in the hallway, but I just got pushed
Mm,
and I was sent to the office. I still remember being in the office because I think that hits you so hard.
right.
And if a lot of your life and your, like, the narrative you have about your life and your relationships are tied up in that feeling, it can be very difficult to let go. I don't want to make it any simpler. I think making it more simple. Oh, if the reactions, raise my hand. Sorry. I don't think making it any easier is going to help anyway. I just want to make it as simple as possible.
Right. Mhm.
That's all.
Um, you have also lots of interest in making certain kinds of cultural observations.
Right.
Did you saw that Matt Walsh retweeted me this week and uh told 2 million people that I'm gay, which is false.
Oh,
Yeah.
so wait, what happened exactly? I saw you. There was some kerfuffle. I didn't
Okay,
see that
well,
he called you gay. Yeah.
Matt Walsh, the very famous political commentator.
Oh yeah, I have opinions.
Okay, well, you can air those if you like. He there was a video going around on Twitter of his saying that if you plan and get your wife her Valentine's Day gift early, that you're gay. I made a comment about that he didn't like, but I didn't retweet him. I retweeted some other person's tweet that had the video in it, but somehow out of, the millions of people who, follow him, he found my tweet and retweeted it to say, "Oh, that was a joke. And if you didn't get it, then you're gay too, Dean." Right? Um, but it wasn't a joke, right? And
Yeah,
even if it was in some sense a joke, it reflects his
I don't
general
think he even knows, but
right.
yeah. I'm
And
sorry. You were
but
saying.
but you were just mentioning that earlier to me and talking about how, you know, you had opinions and thoughts about that and the Matt Walsh show being a contradiction. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think Matt Walsh and people like him, a lot of people in the conservative movement, they have a platform now because they can point out at the left and what they do wrong, and there's a lot to criticize there. I mean, it's obvious, right?
Right.
I'm not even conservative. You can see it. And so they get a platform by criticizing the left and making the left look stupid, which is really easy to do. But that doesn't mean that you have a philosophy of life, or it doesn't mean you know how to make, for instance, Christianity better.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think that's what the contradiction is. I mean, I'm not a Christian, but from my perspective, I would think that if you were a Christian, you would just be more concerned about the message of the church, and
Mm-hmm.
and like, what does it really say, and all these things, and like, when Jesus curses the fig tree or something, like, what does that mean? And just talking about that. And I
Right.
just see a lot of, like, I listened to a Christian call-in show with Scott Furrow down in
Okay.
San Diego. I don't know if you,
I'm
probably
not
not,
familiar with him, but
but and all people do is they just call in and complain about, whatever SJW woke, Bud Light ad, like it's the biggest deal in the world.
right. Right.
And it just seems like a conflict to me. Like, isn't like, doesn't the family come first? Like, don't we build monuments to individuals and to families in Christianity? It just
Mm.
seems like they don't really they don't really know what the solution is, and they feel smart by making the left look bad, and they do make the left look bad. And I don't even think, I mean, when Matt Walsh made, I don't even think he knew he was joking. I
Hmm.
think probably part of his mind is just thinking this is going to get a lot of replies, or
Right.
this is going to be something controversial. It's going to get people talking.
Right.
Um,
Yes, I
yeah.
think, it's very interesting because he retweeted me, and he has 2 million followers, and he retweeted me with what for him was an insult. And I got lots and lots and lots of anonymous accounts coming to repeat the insult, et cetera, et cetera. And Matt Walsh knows that that will happen when he retweets someone. I mean, he knows that his follower count is power. And I think part of the way um, I think what you're trying to say is that there is a contradiction for someone like Matt Walsh, who is publicly Christian, to be so unconcerned with the use of his power, right? And that part of what it means to be a Christian person, or a person with, primarily sort of spiritual values, is to be very aware of the use of your power, so that you do not end up um, harming people, but even more so, um, sort of creating cultural structures that are in a way deceptive. So, sort of what you mean, like, when Matt Walsh uses his power the way he did in that case, he normalizes a kind of behavior that is destructive. And when he normalizes that kind of behavior, he creates because of his influence, he creates a cultural pattern that other people mimic. And so he, in that way, contributes to the the greater, hmm, what's the word, viciousness of our whole society. And that, I think, is an ethical contradiction for a person who claims publicly to be Christian. And maybe that's part of what you're getting at.
Well, it just kind of seems insincere to me.
Mm.
And even if that insincerity is he doesn't really know what he means by that.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, come on, that's like an old trick, right? To not make a joke, but then say it's a joke.
Mm.
Although that has happened to me. But even then, I mean, you got to look at, well, why did people not get it? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the thing with, I just think activism is fundamentally left wing. Like to
Mm.
go out into
Yeah.
society and change it, it's a left wing endeavor. So you get people like Matt Walsh and Steven Crowder, and the Ben Shapiro's doing these reaction videos. It just feels disingenuous and not part of any healthy right wing movement. I mean, not that I'd be in favor of. Look, we need a healthy left wing movement and a healthy right wing movement that talks about, like, philosophy and principles of humanity, and then there needs to be healthy communication. That's what
Mhm.
it looks like.
Say more
Not,
about
oh,
why.
look how stupid you look doing this, drag queen story hour or something, or this is grooming. And yeah, I think a lot of that is grooming. Not all of, well, I think groomers find their way into those kinds of movements,
Mm.
but
Say more
um
about why you think activism is inherently left wing.
because the left, I could describe the difference between the left and the right, at least no, but even in, just, I'll just say the Western world, because this definitely includes Europe and Australia and even other parts. But I would say it's what's in charge? Is it the individual? That's right. Or is it society? That's left. The whole perspective for the leftists, and I came up against cognitive behavioral therapy in grad school, but I also came up, a lot against this social justice. That thing was really getting started, and I was on a campus, that was like ground zero for that stuff.
Mm.
Um, and their whole premise is who you are is because of society. Well, that can't be true because who creates society? You just keep pushing the question back. I mean, it's
Right.
philosophically inane. If you think about it for 2 seconds, it doesn't go anywhere. And of course, when you apply those principles in the clinic, it just gets worse because, I mean, there are feminist therapists I know who are out there right now and probably have a good amount of influence who say that a important part of therapy is activism, is public activism, even though the whole point of therapy is to look at, wait a minute, there's all these things going on out there. I know I'm the common denominator, so how am I at least contributing to it?
Hmm.
That's what I mean by it's like yeah, activism is fundamentally left wing, and looking at yourself and turning in, and that's fundamentally right wing. And
Hmm.
it's like, who's right? I don't know. I think whoever practices their metaphysical view of man better is going to be right. And right now, the left is doing a much better job of that because they have genuine ideas. They're bad ideas, but they have ideas. They've written, powerful literature in the past 150 years or so. And I think the right is quoting Augustine still.
Right. Well, and I think if the right were quoting Augustine, it would be a step
Yeah,
forward.
that would be better.
Um,
Yeah.
because at this point, what we, what we have on the right is, we have a couple of things. It seems to me is divided between the Matt Walshes of the world and a few enclaves of truly sort of intellectual conservatives, right? Who are few and far between. And I don't need, I mean, they may be so few and far between that you aren't even aware of them, but they are out there, right? And almost never the twain should meet. The fissure between sort of your popular level Matt Walsh conservatism and the sort of intellectual conservatism that is generating ideas is so great that it almost can't be overcome. Unlike the left, which tends to be a much more unified because they're activistic, they tend to have political goals around which they can unify in a way that the right often cannot. So for example, a few years ago, I heard a very fascinating speech by a very conservative Catholic philosopher about how nationalized healthcare uh, could fit within a conservative and Catholic framework. Okay. That's an interesting proposition.
Mhm.
But your average Matt Walsh listener, Fox News viewer, is not never going to encounter that because the gap between them and the intellectual, kind of the intellectual elite of the right, is so vast that it can't be overcome. And so the popular right has no ideas, like you're saying. They're just there to score points on social media and make the left look bad.
Yeah, you're saying so the people who like the intellectual discourse on the right so low for most people that they can't see more like intellectually powerful.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a good way to say
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's true. I I come from an interesting perspective here. Like, I am an atheist, but I do definitely sympathize with Christianity and
it.
think, and it's not like it's like I don't think it's a force for good or evil. I mean, I seriously, I just view it like a nuclear family. Like,
Mhm.
that can be something that's really healthy and beneficial, or it can be something that just causes generations of abuse.
Mhm.
It really depends on how you use it and what perspective you take to it. And I would really like to see, and I'm a Jungian guy, so I would really like to see a lot of Christians on the right taking up Jung and saying, uh, there's actually like there's real content to these ideas that we've been purporting. Now, you maybe need to be honest with that and say, well, I didn't get the idea, these ideas aren't why I became a Christian, but this is good intellectual fodder that strengthens our position over here. And I think Jordan Peterson's been doing that to some degree, although
Mhm.
he's fundamentally not a Jungian. He's a guy who read Jung, and that's good. And he talks about Jung, and I really appreciate to whatever extent he's made Jung popular. But I mean, from my perspective, and you may disagree, but I think Christianity needs to evolve. It the what A lot of the intellect that we have behind Christianity now, it worked maybe 150 years ago, but science and there's been advancements to such a degree that I think you need to continue to evolve. I think Jung offered a good outline for doing that, but I think it's really going to take us going back and looking at why we even think Christianity is the way it is. And I mean, right? I mean, why did Augustine say what he did? Because he was a Neoplatonist. He
Hmm.
basically took Christianity and defended it from a Neoplatonist perspective. Well, why couldn't you defend Christianity from an Aristotelian perspective?
Well, that was Aquinas, right? Aquinas did that. Aquinas,
Yeah, but the damage was done, I would argue. I think there was still this split between mind and body, between outer and inner. That was already part of it. And um, yeah, and I think that's still imbued in us today. It's still imbued in Christianity. Like you're saved from something on high.
Mhm.
You need something external outside of you to come in and save you and to save you from your inherent sinful nature. Sexuality being part of that sinful nature, and I think that needs to evolve.
The
And I don't know how we got to that point, but
no, I think I would say this. I would say certainly in America, right? Again, the average evangelical does not need to evolve. He simply has no connection whatsoever to the historic church. Okay, so he has no connection whatsoever to the psychological and spiritual resources put forward by, say, the church fathers, by the most profound Christian thinkers who've lived within in the range of the church. And so he can't imagine anything outside. It's almost like you're saying about CBT, like can't imagine anything outside of his conscious, that there could be anything outside of his conscious awareness. And so he's stuck. This is I guess I'm trying to explain why Christian evangelicals certainly won't embrace Jung, right? Because they can't imagine that anything could exist outside their conscious awareness, because for most evangelicals, I think they have a worldview and an understanding of the world that is flat. And so there's nothing outside of conscious awareness. Um, and the world essentially operates on responsibility and choice. And the reason that one of the reasons that they so want to resist the left is that they see it as undermining the ethic of personal responsibility, and they probably would see something like any kind of psychological understanding of that of the role of the unconscious as also undermining that kind of personal responsibility. And that's
yeah,
and so there's a kind of stuckness there, because um because we can't develop a fully 3D worldview. And in fact, and very few, and in sort of in the evangelical establishment, very few leaders are even capable of doing that. I think that Jordan Peterson obviously has been um, influential within evangelical Christianity to a certain degree too, and maybe that's part of his value there, is to try to sort of introduce people to a more complicated understanding of how people behave and how our minds work. Right.
yeah. Well, the only thing that's really going to introduce you to that, the 3D view of human life, is yeah, coming up against some crisis.
Yeah, suffering.
And I've dealt with that with Christian clients I have. It's like it's some crisis that the church wasn't helping them with.
Hmm.
And I don't think what I do is in any way contradictory to the church. It's
Sure.
just like it's like it's part of religion, and I just take this one part here that was just kind of fuzzy in the canon of Christianity, and I say, no, actually, this part's really important, and we need to get very specific about it,
Mm-hmm.
and then work on that part, and you can go on and have, whatever religious experience, right? Let's work on your psychology until you confront the archetypes
Mm-hmm.
and have a genuine, emotional, affective, uh, visceral, response to that. And then tell me what you see.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what you learn.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's what religion is. And for my best, I mean, I'm no historian, but that really seems, the original Christian church, from my perspective, is just people coming together and admitting their sins, saying this is what I did wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's, yeah. You do that enough, I guarantee you will have some kind of religious experience. You will see something. You have
Sure.
like Sam Harris and do a bunch of LSD and see whatever, or go to some indigenous people like drum circle.
Mm-hmm.
You'll start to see stuff, and you'll be activated by those, and
Well, I
it'll
think
start
that
to guide you. Yeah.
the central difference between what you're describing and real Christian growth is that all of that for the Christian is inspired by love of Jesus. And this is why things like going and doing a bunch of LSD um, are not within the sort of mainstream Christian understanding, because um, because for the Christian, all of that is inspired by a person, and that all of that, the admission of your sins, is really just like you're just describing, a clearing out of your perspective. It's cleaning off your glasses in a way so that you can see. But the only reason you want your glasses clean in the first place, from the Christian perspective, is that you love this person and this person has loved you. And so you're in the context of this spiritual relationship that inspires all of that. Now, that's ideal, right? Like, but your average evangelical maybe doesn't think in those terms, um, but that's at the foundation of the Christian idea of change, has got to be that you have been drawn into a loving relationship with God through the person of Jesus, and Jesus is sort of the inescapable Christian concept.
Yeah. Well, look, as a non-Christian, I can say that's 100% true, what you just said, and that's what people need to do.
Mhm.
That's not a really clear process, and it's my job as somebody from
Right,
the outside looking at, right? Okay, because I come from like a Methodist whatever upbringing, I don't
right.
know, and I didn't get confirmed because none of it made sense to me. Nobody could say it in a way that made sense. One of the church elders came down in this, and he talked to us about Jesus, and it just kind of made me feel humiliated
Of course.
watching him fumble through these things. And I was in seventh grade, and I could tell.
This is what I'm saying. This is exactly what I'm describing. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't until, but I had to read Jung to really understand, oh, this is maybe what you mean by Christ.
Mm, mm,
Christ is this integrative function,
mm.
this thing that symbolizes this transcendent function in our brain that unites our unconscious and our conscious.
Right. But I think the Christian is claiming it's not just in your conscious and unconscious. It is in the cosmos, between the hearts of men and the heart of God, that there is an integrative function there that reconciles one of those to the other. And that
Yeah, I
what's in
think,
your
but I
conscious and unconscious is only a reflection of the more metaphysical reality.
yeah, it's a reflection of who we are by our nature, and that's where archetypes come from. Yeah, I think that's true.
The was I want to be clear too, right? That I don't think that I don't I have no doubt that sort of your average evangelical, like you're describing, could come to you for real help. And in fact, I would encourage people to come to a therapist, even an atheistic therapist, for help. Um, at times because resources within the church tend to be so scant, right? So
Yeah.
I just want to concur with you that I don't doubt that that there are Christian people who come to you for and find it very helpful.
Well, you need to come to a crisis in your life, and I define crisis by you're in this place. Maybe you have no idea how you got there, or you keep finding yourself stuck, and you think maybe you're the problem. And I would say there's nothing wrong with you. There's just these natural parts of you that you're not relating with well, and it's coming out in these, like your wife left you, your children hate you, whatever it is.
Hmm.
And when you're really ready to think, to look at, quite honestly, how you're responsible for everything in your life, and we get very specific about it, not just say it. Anybody can say it. And when people talk about responsibility, they usually mean, yeah, the external world. But let's just take responsibility first for your emotional state.
Hmm.
And when you're upset at libtards or something
Right.
on Twitter, like, could you consider maybe that's a reflection of you, and you maybe need something like that? The
Mm,
fact that you need something like that is why the libtard exists in the first place.
right. Right.
You know, I really think in order to step beyond this cultural schism, whatever we're going through, to whatever extent we are, I don't even know. It's just all people's perception of it. That's part of the work we need to do.
We just we got a few minutes left. Was there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't brought up?
Um, no, I mean, well, what do you think of what I'm saying? Do you think this metaphor interpretation of Jesus is you're a Christian?
Yes. And I believe
And
Jesus is a real person. He's more okay, let me say this. I would not say that Jesus is not an th- Jesus is not, how do I say this? I would not deny that there are archetypal realities, okay? But that those archetypal for example, some of those archetypes, the hero archetype, okay, is a reflection of a real person. It doesn't just exist in some abstract way in all of our unconscious. It is there because there is a real hero, right? And that there is one preeminent hero in the cosmos who has done the most heroic thing, which is to reconcile the hearts of humanity and the heart of God, who is um, kind of the foundational divine essence of being, right? And so he's Jesus in his work and in his heroic work has made a way for human beings to be reunited with the foundation of everything that is, right, from which we've been alienated,
Mhm.
right? But the
Yeah,
point is, he's a real person. He's not just an archetype. He's not just an idea. He's a person.
yeah, I mean, I think he's a real person too, and I understand the need to have both things. I think we have this pattern, this archetype in our mind, and then when we see it expressed, it's easy for us to explicate it,
Well,
and it makes it more real.
I don't necessarily just mean that I think that he is a historical person. I mean, he's a real person now, and that he is the most important person. Um, and that he is a person in a transcendent sense, right? That he is, though he's an invisible person, basically.
So he's an idea.
Well, depends on how do you how do you define an idea, right?
I
Um,
mean,
mhm,
okay.
right.
It's a thought that we have. I mean, it can still affect us, and maybe you can say this thought is so transcendent or such a unifying thought among humanity that it's like it
Right.
exists as if it exists in another
But
realm.
but my mother is not a thought. No other person is a thought. And I'm saying that while Jesus may in fact be a thought, I may have a thought of Jesus in my mind. He is a person in the same sense that you and I are persons, and that my mother is a person, and that all
Mhm.
other people are a person, and that and that that all those people are more than ideas. He
Yeah.
may be there may be parts of them in which I experience them as ideas, right? Like, Mark Derian, in a sense, exists within my mind as I know, as I perceive you. But
Mhm.
you're more than my ideas of you. You have an
Yeah.
existence independent of those.
Well, I think of it like this, and let me know if this helps us see some kind of not agreement, but just I want to make sure we're on the same page. When I think of prairie dogs, I mean, if prairie dogs were able to evolve to the point where they could tell stories, they would tell stories of prairie dogs who can call out to other prairie dogs and let them know that a predator is in the air, or a prairie dog that can dig really well and dug this whole tunnel system in a
Okay.
month or something. Those are archetypes because it's based on what's important for the prairie dog, what the prairie dog needs to function. That's like a physical lower function. I think humanity needs more. We need food, man cannot survive on bread and, all
Right.
that stuff. There are higher functions, there are higher spiritual functions, and that's what Jesus is, the prairie dog who can call the other prairie dogs really well version of that. And he is like, that is an idea that tells us what matters to us. It's to me, it's saying if you want to grow, if you want to change, you need to live like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this kind of weird story of this Jew sitting up to the Roman Empire. So you got to think, how does that apply to my life?
Sure.
And
I mean, I agree with all that. I just
okay,
think it's missing the element, which is why grow at all? And the reason you grow at all is because you are seeking your fulfillment in union with God, who is the divine foundation of all being. You are seeking a kind of union. You are seeking to be fitted for a union that that is only possible because one person has already done it. So you're right. So when you look at Jesus or whatever, you could say this is how you need to grow, but you're not growing for no reason. You're growing in order to be fitted to partake in the divine nature. Now,
yeah, I
unfortunately,
think I think there's we agree there's just this element. Sorry if you hear a toddler crying. There's just this element of supernaturalism that you put on it that I've like. Is it supernatural to you? Is there need to be a supernatural component? Maybe
I
I
don't
should
really
ask that.
know. I don't know what supernature is. I only know that I don't. I'm the division of supernatural and natural to me is seems arbitrary and not very helpful. It is only um yeah, I don't know what that I don't know how you designate those. Now, unfortunately,
Hmm.
I have to go.
Okay.
I know we're right in the middle of a fascinating talk, but
Yeah, I could talk about this all day.
we'll have to do it again.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much, Mark.
I sorry about the toddler. I
Oh,
think
I
I'm
can't
being
even
called.
hear you. This is a pro toddler show.
Okay. All
All
right. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Dean.
right. Bye bye.